Good evening, everybody. This is Scott Morganroth here at the South Florida Tribune Broadcasting Network for tonight's edition of the Sports Exchange. And boy, we have a busy one on hand. In the studio is Louis Edio Weiss. Louis.
Hola, how's it going?
Doing all right. Having a blast. And with us is Ryan, Fantasy Football Skullroot. Long time no talk, all of one night.
Yeah, it's been forever. It's been like, not even 24 hours?
Not even that, my man. But meanwhile, happy Halloween to you and the kids out there in Seattle. Although you probably take a little while before you get started. You'll be long ready to do your thing after we get going. We have a long night ahead, so let's get to it. All right, so let's talk about what you got to offer for our fantasy lovers out there.
Well, today's what I really want to talk to after kind of going over matchups and everything. The last night on our show and then the night before. What I really want to talk about was DFS, daily fantasy, and some of the values that you can find. And actually, real quick, the top couple of stories I want to hit right on that real quick. Le'Veon Bell apparently has shown some frustration with the lack of touches, which usually the squeaky hinge gets the grease, and so I can see him getting a ton of work against Miami and having a huge game this week. Josh Gordon finally got released, which is something that, in terms of fantasy, if you have the space, he's a guy that I wouldn't mind having, just in case he, ends up somewhere that needs is desperate for a wide receiver. And for fantasy players, it's great news that Devontae Adams is back at practice. I think that helps. I think that everyone who drafted Devontae Adams probably as their number one wide receiver, if not as the number one wide receiver overall, is very happy to hear that. I think that he will be in for a good game this next week. So getting into the DFS values. Derek Carr right now is one of my favorite values this week in terms of DFS, simply because he's got a great matchup against Detroit. Detroit is one of the worst teams in terms of defending the pass. They give up the sixth most amount of fantasy points to the quarterback position. And so I can see Derek Carr throwing for 3 or 4 touchdowns in this one. He's only $27 on Yahoo DFS, $5,500 on DraftKings. And if you consider, a lot of the guys like Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson costs $7,100 of a $5,500 or a $55,000 budget. That's a big chunk of change. So Derek Carr being only 55, only 1/10 of your budget, allows you to get some big name running backs or some big name wide receivers that you think have great matchups. So Derek Carr, I think, has a great matchup in terms of value. I am putting Russell Wilson on here, and both on DraftKings and on Yahoo, he is the most expensive quarterback. That being said, usually that's not the best way to go about it, even if it's a great matchup, because there's a tendency to have some disappointment there, because there always seems to be picking that top guy, spending even with a good matchup, maybe they get up by enough that they kind of pull take the foot off the gas a little bit and just run the ball. Well, against the Buccaneers, in terms of yardage, are the number one rush defense, giving up the least amount of rushing yards, and I think in terms of fantasy, they give up the third least amount of points to fantasy running backs. So Wilson's going to be forced to throw it. They're going to be throwing a lot in this game. The Buccaneers can't stop the pass. They give up the most points to the quarterback. So Russell Wilson should be in for a huge game, and I think he's actually worth the big price tag this week. I usually don't say that, but this week, because of how much the Seahawks usually depend on the run, but have the ability to pass the ball a lot, Russell Wilson, I think, is a great value, and is a must-start, whether, even in season long. And back to Derek Carr, I think he's a great streaming pick for those of you who are maybe dealing with a bye week with your starting quarterback.Moving on to a couple of running backs. I know you're going to love to hear this, Scott, but Josh Jacobs, I think, is in for a huge week this week. I heard the clapping. I saw the smile in the back of my head from you.
You got that right. We've worked together long enough for you to know that, right? Okay, but meanwhile, my sister-in-law has Le'Veon Bell, so we'll see if I'm clapping or doing a cartwheel.
So Josh Jacobs, he is $24 on Yahoo, $6,500 on DraftKings. Compare that to, say, someone like Christian McCaffrey, who is $10,000 on DraftKings. That is the highest. The highest I've ever seen someone is, I think I've seen a couple like $97, $98, $100. No, Christian McCaffrey at $10,000 of your budget, of a $5,500 budget, you need 10 players on. That's way too much to be spending. Get someone like Josh Jacobs, again, has a very, very good matchup against the Lions defense. They give up the third most amount of fantasy points to the running back position. Jacobs just finished, or has just been declared the October, rookie, offensive rookie of the month. So I think that Jacobs is in for a huge game and provides a decent amount of value for the price you can get him. Another running back, Devin Singletary, now that he is officially healthy from his hamstring injury, I think that he puts up a decent amount of points. He's really cheap, $16 on Yahoo, $4,700 on DraftKings. I think he provides a great value. Buffalo is going up against the Washington Redskins, who have struggled just on defense overall this season. And so they give up, they're in the top 10 and giving up fantasy points to the running back position. So I think Singletary, with his ability to not only run the ball, but catch the ball out of the backfield, provides a huge value. And Jalen Samuels, this is more of kind of a dart throw. He's only $4,000 on DraftKings, $12 on Yahoo. He is the one who is going to be starting this week for the Steelers. They are going up against the Colts, so it's not the greatest matchup. They give up the sixth least amount of points against running backs. But I think Jalen Samuels, because of the value, his ability to not only run but catch the ball in the backfield, again, we're talking about half-point PPR and full-point PPR type of leagues, he still, I think, has enough value with how cheap you can get him that he will bring back the investment in terms of your lineup. So a couple of wide receivers I got on here, right about the same price. DK Metcalf and Marvin Jones, they're both $18 on Yahoo. DK on DraftKings is $5,700. Again, we're talking about the Buccaneers and how much they give up in terms of the to the quarterbacks, to the wide receivers. They give up the seventh most to wide receivers. I would take DK Metcalf over Lockett simply because of the price point. Lockett's, I believe, the fifth most expensive wide receiver on DraftKings and on Yahoo this week. So I think that DK could provide about the same amount of fantasy points as Tyler Lockett, but at a cheaper price, which is going to allow you to put some other guys on your lineups that you may want a little bit more. Marvin Jones, again, $18 on Yahoo, $6,000 on DraftKings, is another guy that has provided a lot of value going up against an Oakland Raiders team that gives up a ton of points to the wide receivers, Galladay and Jones. Again, I think that he could put up a similar day as Galladay, but is also a lot cheaper than Galladay and Jones. So, again, both of those guys I think are solid plays for this week at the wide receiver position to provide value and be able to spend more in other spots. And as far as a tight end, Cameron Brate, I hate bashing on my own team, but they are terrible in terms of defending tight ends, giving up the fourth most amount of fantasy points to the tight end position. And with O.J. Howard out, has not practiced all this week. Cameron Brate was dealing with the rib injury yesterday, missed practice, but made it back into practice today. So he is looking to start. He's kind of been off and on in terms of his production and how much he's been targeted. Last week he had 6 targets, finished with 3 catches for 32 yards. Unfortunately, going against the Seahawks, those 6 targets could become 5 catches, 50 yards. So at only $12, he's one of the cheapest values you can get for a tight end. $3,100 in terms of DraftKings. He is another guy that I think that, depending on how you have your lineup construction, that if you wanted just a cheap tight end to be able to spend in other places, Cameron Brate is a solid pick for you right there.
Okay, now we got a few more things before we have to run here. So you got players to avoid.
A couple of players to avoid. Chris Carson, again, I talked about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers being so good against running backs. Chris Carson is like the 5th or 6th most expensive running back on both platforms that I deal with, and so he's a kind of avoid, move on, try someone else. David Montgomery I have as an avoid. I know that everyone's really excited about the fact that he played so well last week and finally got the carries. He has a tough matchup this week going up against a defense that is top 10 in terms of giving up fantasy points. So it's just a not a great matchup for him. So don't go chasing last week's points thinking you're going to get them this week. Odell Beckham, again, I'm not solid on the Browns. Their offense is the only person in the Browns offense I want anything to do with is Nick Chubb. Everyone else I am avoiding in terms of DFS. There's too much unpredictability. Mike Evans, again, the Seahawks do give up, have been known to give up the big plays against wide receivers. It's usually the secondary wide receiver, though, that gets the Seahawks more. And so that would be more Chris Godwin. I like Chris Godwin a whole lot more than Mike Evans this week. And Travis Kelce, again, with Travis Kelce, it's more of I just am avoiding a guy. I mean, if you've drafted him, you're going to hold on to him in your season-long leagues. But as far as for DFS, I would spend somewhere else, again, like a Cameron Brate, simply because there just hasn't been the consistency. It's been a little bit better the last couple of weeks with Matt Moore. But I'm still kind of laying off of Travis Kelce in terms of DFS until we see some consistent production out of him.
Okay, a couple other notes we'll go over before we wrap this thing up. Obviously, you indicated that earlier Devontae Adams is back at practice. So he's doing everything the wide receivers are doing. And and you said Delaney Walker missed practice again. Is that right?
Yeah, Delaney Walker missed practice again with his ankle injury, so that means Jonnu Smith is almost definitely going to be the starting tight end. He's another value guy. I didn't necessarily put him on my list because Cameron Brate's cheaper,
right?
But and it's not as good of a matchup. Jonnu Smith for the Titans. The Panthers are about 21 in terms of giving up fantasy points to the tight end position, so it's not as great of a matchup. But he has shown really great rapport with Tannehill so far this season, and so I think he could be a solid streaming option this week. Again, I prefer Cameron Brate in terms of DFS, though.
And finally, is Adam Gase looking to run the score up?
Maybe. That all depends. I think I've heard a lot of differing opinions that the Jets could lose this game. It could be Miami's first win. I don't think he runs the score up because I could see just enough struggles out of the Jets offense that maybe it's a little bit closer than the Jets would want it. So I think he may try, but both teams' defenses are pretty bad enough that I think it could still be a pretty close game.
Okay. All right, Ryan. We'll see how everything works out over the weekend, but you have yourself a good weekend, and we'll check back with you for next Tuesday's edition of the Sports Exchange. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it.
All right. It's always a joy to be on here, and happy Halloween.
Thank you. You too. All right, Lewis, what are your thoughts about what Ryan had to say?
I mean, yeah, ever since I watched that Week 1 Monday night matchup with Josh Jacobs, I've been really impressed by the guy. I think he's a foundational piece for that offense, especially somebody to work with Derek Carr. I like him. I think he's an early front runner to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. I mean, it's nice to see Devontae Adams back practicing again. You and I know he both missed some time with turf toe. Yeah, I think Aaron Jones' role may be depleted a little bit when Adams returns, but at the same time, the way that the Packers have been playing, and given the fact that, say, Adams, by chance plays on Sunday against a Chargers team that just fired their offensive coordinator, Ken Wisenhunt, could be, a nice little drumming for them, too. Big beat up on them in the meantime. But, yeah.
Okay. Well, meanwhile, we're going to try to get Ron Swoboda on here.
But, no, I mean, I think if anything, I'm looking forward to it. So I'm very interested to see how Lamar Jackson's going to do against New England as we move to Week 9. I think that'll be the most fascinating storyline heading into this next week of NFL football. Although, I mean, I am interested in that Chiefs game. See how Matt Moore does second time around.
You have reached.
But, yeah. No, I mean, we'll see what happens. I actually found a funny line going into, we got, talk to me a little bit about this, Scott. We got Brady and Lamar Jackson going up against each other. I actually found a line through their first 14 starts, both of them are both 11-3 as quarterbacks, and they have nearly identical passer ratings, touchdown interception ratios. I mean, it's pretty insane how similar they've been thus far, and it's weird considering that Brady doesn't necessarily possess